Steve Bannon, welcome to Chopper's Brexit podcast and a live video recording of this interview.
Thanks for having me today.
How often do you speak to President Trump?
Well, I talk to guys in the White House every day.
Yeah.
But for the president, while these investigations are going on, particularly you saw yesterday that at the committee, Democrats went crazy and trying to subpoena me again. So it's always best in that regard to go through lawyers.
So you're hot stuff at the moment for him.
Yeah, but I think all of us are. I think it's just a process, and you're going to have to go through a process. I think that Mueller's investigation will be wrapping up. I happen to think it'll be wrapping up this fall. I think the ones on Capitol Hill will definitely be wrapping up before this year's what I call Trump's first re-elect, which will take place in November of this year.
Okay, and you think you got a chance to get back into the White House at once?
I have zero interest.
You moved on from that.
Oh yeah,
you won him in his place.
I didn't. Well, I didn't. Donald Trump won, because he's a unique individual. Remember, he's not a politician; he's really a leader, and he's been talking about these issues, even things like Brexit, for years and years and years. And so, no, I came in 88 days ago. It was down, like 16 points, but it was just to add some stability, focus on message, and really to focus on where he should go and where he should spend his time. And look, he did the rest. He's the most unique populist since William Jennings Bryan, so right. We're very, very fortunate.
To what extent do you think Brexit gave Americans the permission to vote for Donald Trump?
I think 100%. I've said from day one, Brexit actually had a much bigger impact. It was my interest in this whole issue back in 2013 and 14 that we started Breitbart London. I remember Nigel Farage said the day after the victory that on BBC, his first interview, it had not been for Breitbart London, the Brexit wouldn't have taken place. And one of the reasons was we became a platform for UKIP and some of these ideas. And I saw that by really following around Nigel in the European parliamentary elections in 14, in May, April and May of 14. It really came to me that said, hey, there's something really going on here. These people are looking for their independence. And so I tell people Brexit and 2016 are inextricably linked. Ideas in the political marketplace travel like ideas in the financial marketplace. If something happens in the city of London, the next day it's in Wall Street, the next day it's in Singapore and Tokyo and Hong Kong. Same thing with political ideas. Particularly the deplorables on websites like Breitbart, the Daily Caller, and Fox were intensely focused in the spring of 2016 on Brexit. They knew the issues, they knew the players. When that happened, and it came as a surprise to a lot of people, but it didn't really come to a surprise to the readers of Breitbart. We were actually doing our radio show over here live for a week. That you should have seen the momentum and really people saying, hey, this can really be done. Yeah. And I think the mainstream media never really followed it. They were stunned by Brexit and they were stunned by Trump's victory, but there's definitely a connection between the two.
And do you think that the way it's being treated, we're 2 years on now, you've seen the shape of a Chequers deal that came out last week. Are you concerned about this won't deliver on what people voted for?
The exact same thing's happening. I think that's for your readers of the Telegraph. By the way, it's one of my favorite papers, one of the great papers in the world. They should understand. The same thing has happened since these were surprise victories by basically the deplorables, right? Middle England on one hand and the little guy in America on the other. The nullification project of both is underway by the elites. Yeah. You've seen it here from the City of London, from the Goldman Sachs's, from CBI. They've been trying to slow walk this. Soros tried for a while, putting money into it. They want another vote. They always want to vote again. They want to do over. They've slow walked this, and you've seen this in this kind of watered down white paper that the Prime Minister has come up with. It's been a nullification the entire time to try to buy time so they can not have it put into effect. Same thing with Trump. What you saw with Trump, immediately the Democrats couldn't embrace the fact they didn't talk about economic nationalism. They didn't talk about jobs for the working class. They did identity politics. When they lost, it had to be the Russians. It had to be the Russians.
It's someone else's fault.
Yeah, and they've had this nullification project. What is leading us into the United States this November 6th is really Trump's
midterm
first
elections.
Well, heretofore they've been called midterms. Now I want to rebrand them. This is Trump's first re-elect because they're getting their do-over. Because they understand if they take the House of Representatives, they're going to impeach him. They don't want to say that right now because they've looked at the polling and they understand the thing that drives the deplorables to the polls. Yeah. In a presidential year, kind of output is the fact of impeachment. And so you're seeing the same exact thing that's happening in England is happening in the United States. When the elites, just because you win an election, the elites, they all love democracy until they start losing elections.
What will happen next, though? The establishment is taking back control, to use that phrase that was used.
Well, I think to me, I think what's going to happen for the readers of the Telegraph to really be on the watch for. I think they're going to try to slow walk this until the fall, and they're going to say there's some sort of crisis, and they're going to try to lift Title 50, Section 50, right? And then
delay Article 50.
Just delay Article 50 and just delay this thing, and then hopefully it peters out over time and people forget about it. I don't put anything past, the corporate interest and the banking interest, the City of London, these multinational corporations, CBI, they're just like the same elites in the United States.
But it's quite risky, that, isn't it? Because you're defying the will of the people. In this country, 17.4 million people voted for it. And to face it down
if the
way,
people, well, here's what they think. They think they can wear down, they think by all the media, they think by the Soros campaign, they think that people just forget or people just get worn down. Or remember, most conservatives and populists have their lives to live. They're not engaged in politics 24 hours a day. It's not like these cultural Marxist lefty activists. That's all they live for. People have lives. And what they hope to do is just to wear people down. I think the most important thing is for people to understand. They're just not going to give your country back on one election. You're going to have to fight for this every day. And nothing could be clearer in this than Brexit. If you want to have Brexit, you want to have a hard Brexit and have Britain, declare its independence and join the world, join America, join the Commonwealth, join the emerging nations of the world, and kind of cut at least these inextricably linked ties to Europe. You're going to have to do it because I got to tell you, you see in that white paper, they have no intention. They have no intention of giving you the hard Brexit.
Back in,
well, you voted. To me, it was a pretty clear cut. Particularly the fact that the whole world of media and politics and celebrity was against the leave. That you see what happened, and so I think it's exactly analogous to what's happening in the United States. It's a little different because yours is a referendum. Here, they've rejected Trump day one. They don't think the deplorable should have a voice, and so they've gone after Trump tooth and nail. And by the way, for us, they are going to get a do-over. This November, they've got the possibility if they take the House of Representatives to try to impeach him. And I think that's what
the Democrats.
Yeah, Democrats and also the opposition party media. Cool, Remember, it's the whole cultural aspect of this. The Democratic Party is pretty feckless, right? You can't really think of a Trump policy like in China or Korea. You don't automatically think, oh, this is the Democrat alternative, right? They've leaned on the crutch of the opposition party media. And over there, it's even worse than here, right? You have this kind of inextricably linked union of the culture, of pop culture, of Hollywood, of the universities, and in media, and that's really formed the vanguard of the fight against Trump. And they're going to get a do-over this year. Now, here's why they're starting to get triggered now, and you're starting to see them out running around the streets. This whole thing they were promised of a blue wave. The numbers are just not adding up, and I think they see now that it's starting to lose momentum, and they're going to turn on each other and have the civil war.
That's a blue Democrat wave.
Yeah, blue Democrat wave.
Because in Britain, that's the Conservatives.
Yes, we have a little.
Forgive me if it's
so in the United States, remember, we've been at war with the Republican establishment for about 9 or 10 years. At Breitbart and the other kind of populist nationalists. Trump, came into this movement. He was kind of,
he fought his way through all the candidates.
Exactly, and he came. There was a number of people who said, "Hey, this is the type of Republican we're looking for." But that war against the establishment is an everyday war. Here in the United Kingdom, you're seeing the fact that you just saw what the establishment was going to do. I think it's incumbent upon Nigel Farage and people like Boris Johnson and some of these other heroes to really pick up the.
Will there be an uprising amongst people? Do you think? Will it be a march?
Well, I got to tell you, there's going to be an uprising. You're going to start to see in August and September and October as we go towards our midterms in the U.S. You're going to start to see the deplorables come out. I think Trump's going to be campaigning 5 days a week come mid-September, October. The people in the United Kingdom, in England, if they want Brexit, they're going to have to get up. I mean, now I keep hearing that at the Daily Telegraph they're getting thousands of letters a day, where traditionally get a couple of hundred. I think letters are one thing, but I think you're going to have to really get empowered.
That's quite English letters.
Yes, but
English letters.
But here's what's important. You're seeing here they're supposed to have tens of thousands of protesters against Trump, and that's fine. People have freedom of speech, but I believe people are going to have to really get up on it and let people know that, hey, we voted to leave. and we demanded it.
There was zero press outside the residence last night.
Yeah, they didn't mention. You didn't see that in the mainstream media.
Well,
right?
on Newsnight on the BBC, they reported it, and they couldn't find one protest to interview at 11 o'clock at night.
Yeah. I don't think they're going to have the 500,000. Or they were.
Well, we'll see. That's on Friday, so we'll see. Do you think Britain has the right leader for Brexit? By which I mean Theresa May. Has she got the character to deliver a clean Brexit, which is what you're saying and what many think that people voted for in 2016?
Look, when I was at Goldman Sachs and I was in the M&A department and learning how to negotiate, and then reading Trump's book Art of the Deal, the one thing you want to do is overshoot your target to try to eventually get to a deal. Trump said something very wise about deal making. He said any deal that takes a long time, normally either A, doesn't get done, or if it gets done, it's just a misfit.
So you start there and you rein it back.
Yeah, I think, and Boris Johnson said at this private dinner a couple of weeks ago, it's been reported in the Telegraph that, hey, Trump would have gone in bloody hard, right? And I think that's what you needed to do. You needed to really push this. The white paper, to me, was if you had told me 2 years after that vote, and after what it took on both the immigration side with Farage and the kind of sovereignty side with Boris Johnson on the leave, if you had told me 2 years afterwards that that's what you would get, I would say this is not what people voted for. This is not what people fought for. So, I don't want to. I think Theresa May's got a lot of great qualities. I'm not sure if it's the right leader at the right time.
You need someone to almost drag the establishment with you. Someone like a Makura leader like Boris Johnson.
You have to go into the establishment and say, hey, here's the way it's going to be.
Yeah.
Right. The people have
We're
spoken.
paying your wages.
The people have spoken, and here's how we're going to do it. And everybody says it's so complicated. Yeah, everything's complicated, right? But if you have the will, and if you have the intention, and if you have the grit, you can do it, and those are all great British qualities. That's what I think. I think the other thing is not being sold. Is that, and I said this earlier on another broadcast this morning, but it's that when Theresa May and the team came over, and I think it was in late January or February, the very first people we saw, is that I sat down with Liam Fox, we sat down with the team, and the discussion was, and Trump actually gave her some pointers and said, hey, pulled her off to the side and said, hey, if I was doing this, here's how tough you got to be, because these guys are not going to let you go.
What did he say in that conversation?
I don't know the full, but I know that but I know he was very, he always understands that if you're going to make a deal done, you got to get it done. It's got to have.
You give her the book.
You have to have momentum. You have to have. You have to get it. You have to get on with it, right? If it drags out, deal either doesn't get done or gets on worse terms than you want. It's very tough to execute it after you actually close.
That was February last year. Did he give the book over?
Well, I think he gave her the précis, which is overshoot your target, be tough, right, and get on with it, because if this drags on, it's going to be bad. In addition, Liam Fox, we sat down with the guys and said, hey, we are 100% and back you. We will do a terrific deal for you guys. And no offense, the future, you've got China, you've got all these other things you can do deals with in the emerging countries and the Commonwealth countries.
Critics are concerned here of a US deal that will just get completely, to use an English word, shafted by the Americans, will be in their favour rather than UK suppliers or manufacturers.
Listen, you're our mother country. You're our mother country. We're going to be tough negotiators, but I think it'll be a fair deal. Yeah. But one of the things about Trump's policy towards trade, because we're upside down, we're upside down with everybody in the world. Yeah. His thing is reciprocity. Yeah. I can tell you one thing that Donald Trump will really stick to is that it'll be a fair deal. He understands that these deals lock in these commercial relationships a long periods of time, and they have to work with both parties. Yeah. If everybody you talk to Trump, you talk to partners of Trump on the real estate side, they'll tell you that he's a great partner to have. He understands, because a lot of these things he just manages. He doesn't own the underlying real estate. Yeah. He's got a reputation of being a good partner. So I think he understands that's the whole thing. It really gets back to NATO. Yeah. On NATO, Trump's a businessman. Yeah. When we first got involved in this whole NATO situation in the first couple of weeks of administration, he had talked about it for years, but he really got under the hood and
isn't it?
He looked at the math and he says, listen, I want an alliance. What we don't want is a protectorate. We're not an imperial power. Europe and NATO is not supposed to be we're not supposed to totally protect it. We're supposed to be allies, right?
We come to your aid if required, but you're going to help.
Well, no, we'll work together, and yes, we'll pull together. We don't want a situation like World War I or World War II. We have to come in at the end. We want to really be allies, but to do that, you need equipment, you need readiness, you need interoperability, all that kind of technical stuff you need to do as militaries. And here's what he found: that nobody was paying up. People were paying basically under 1%, or around 1% of their GDPs. It just can't work doing that. So the first thing he says, you got to get to 2%. Then he said, instead of waiting but here's what happened. Yesterday's a very big day. He said, instead of waiting to 2024, you got to bring it up to today. We need this, and we need to do it. And by the way, we, the United States, are at 4.2% when you really calculate it.
3.1?
4.2.
Okay.
If you really count, by the way, the public number is about 3.5.
Exactly, yeah.
But if you really look at the math, it's
Okay.
about 4.2.
Okay.
And Trump's had some pretty significant defense increases, and a lot of that for readiness here about our forces in Europe. Now, what happened yesterday, in the afternoon, the boring bits, you had the readiness initiative. That's one of the things Trump's been pushing, right? After the Ready Initiative came out, Trump said, hey, look, upon further review, it's 4%. That is a big deal. I mean, Trump wants this to work. People say he's an isolationist. People said, he treated people badly. Look, he's got a house style that's blunt.
Yeah.
He's a businessman. But what people in England and the United Kingdom should understand is that this is a guy that's working every day on the hard stuff. NATO is the not glamorous, part of the presidency, but he's really got his hands dirty on this thing. He's into the numbers big time. We've made a significant commitment as the United States. Our defense budget now is almost $800 billion, right? A lot of that is to increase our forces here in the Mediterranean and in NATO.
Well, what odds would you give a trade deal now, given that white paper, and given that what Donald Trump's told the Sun overnight?
Well, I got to tell you, it's dependent upon. When I read the white paper, I don't think the United States can actually do. Now, Theresa May says something different last night at Bannon. She says, first thing we're going to talk about today is a free trade deal with the United States. I think, and I'm not an economist expert in trade, but at least the way I read it, it'd be very tough for us because essentially we'd be doing a deal with the EU.
20%?
Well, that's the point. It looks like you really are part of the EU financially, particularly on agriculture and goods. And so I don't see how it can happen. I will tell you from the very beginning, and we told Liam Fox and the guys this when they came over. We're prepared to cut a very fair deal and we're prepared to do it rapidly. They kind of told us, hey, we've got to almost get out of this, but we do it. And we told them, we have a team ready to go. It's our number one priority to cut a deal with you guys. So if you tell us, we'll be on a plane the next day and we'll make this happen.
We have a strong, long-lasting special relationship
Well,
with the States.
first of all, we have a strong cultural relationship.
Yeah.
We're one of your colonies. People, I lived here partly in the 90s. But as importantly, there's $1 trillion on both sides of the Atlantic that are invested. You guys have $1 trillion.
We're your biggest inward investor.
Yeah, biggest investor. By the way, I think it's 10 times China. Yeah. It's 5 times Germany. And France, I think, combined. Great Britain, the United Kingdom has $1 trillion invested in the United States, and we have $1 trillion investment in you. So there's a very tight financial commercial bond already, and I think we can leverage off that.
Yeah. So to what extent do you think Brexit is a betrayal of the vote then in 2016?
Well, it depends on what. To me, the vote was very, very straightforward. Yeah. You want to leave the European Union, get your independence, become an independent country, have British courts. Sovereignty issue, and have British courts for British people and British law. I'm just telling you about the white paper I read. The white paper I read and the whole preamble, instead of a declaration of independence, it was kind of, hey, we're still a junior partner and we don't want to upset you and step on any toes.
It's self-effacing.
I just say, if you had told people 2 years ago that this is what they're going to have, they go, this is not what we voted for. We want a clean break. And we understand the government, I said it was so complicated. I got that it's complicated, but it's not that complicated. This is not astrophysics, right? It's still about human agency. That deal can still be made. Here's what I think is going to happen. I think they're going to try to slow walk this. And in this fall, they're going to talk about some sort of crisis, but Article 50, they're going to try to get out of that.
Which is possible. You can delay, can't you?
Yes, and just have this thing kind of peter out.
And it's never ending.
Never ending. And people finally get tired of it. And that's why I think that this is a moment in time, kind of an inflection point. The things come out, you've seen a lot. You've seen two major, two major resignations.
Boris Johnson.
These are.
Have you met Boris Johnson?
I've met Boris Johnson many times.
And you think he's a good potential prime minister, which is what Donald Trump said?
I think he's one of the most dynamic people on the world stage. I understand that. Look, he's got a long history here. Yeah. I read Max Hastings' piece on him in the Times in London the other day. Which I know, but
that's the view.
Yeah, exactly. So people have different perspectives. I've always found him incredibly engaging. He's a big ideas guy. I believe he looks like a doer. Yeah. He's clearly, for someone who was foreign secretary, to actually resign over this. And I thought his letter was terrific, because I think his letter really articulated, his resignation letter. I understand he's actually going to give a speech on his resignation on Monday. So I think that's what I hear.
Has he told you that?
Well, I kind of hear through the hear through the grapevine that may be happening. I think that's something for people to.
Has his time come to leave this country?
I believe moments come. It's like Donald Trump. When Donald Trump was at the top of the escalator on June 16th of 2016, he was in 7th place. Yeah. People dismissed him.
That was before the.
Well, he took the escalator down and gave a speech. He gave a firebrand speech on immigration, on our security, on our finances, and it connected the little guy. That night, the Huffington Post and Rachel Maddow and the progressive New York Times went to full meltdown. Here's this brash guy coming down, and they ripped him apart. By the next morning, he was number one in the polls.
So should Boris Johnson pull off his stabilizers, pull off his things, just throw off the calipers and go for it?
The flood tide.
Now's the moment.
Now's the moment. I think if Boris Johnson looks at this, and others, there's got to be others that do this. And by the way, if they decide not to do it, they decide not to.
That involves challenging the Prime Minister.
My point is that there comes an inflection points. I think the white paper was an inflection point. The Chequers deal was an inflection point. We'll have to see what happens. But the thing I think Trump shows people, and I think Salvini got this, I think Orban's got this, I think these populists around Europe and now in Asia, people respond to bold action.
Yeah.
And by the way, the bold action can have hard edges on it, and the bold action doesn't have to be perfect. Yeah. It can be a little shabby sometimes, right? But what people want is they're tired of political speak. They're tired of this nomenclature, the permanent political class. What they want is the people to get on with it. Even if you don't always succeed, as long as you're kind of pushing forward, and they know that you have their interests in mind, I think people are very forgiving.
You lived here in the 90s, you're familiar with British politics. To what extent is Donald Trump like Margaret Thatcher? The Thatcher of the 80s, overthrowing, encouraging.
Well, the House style is different, but I got to tell you the concept. Here's the one thing about populism in Europe, and I think what Thatcher does not get credit for, and what Trump believes. Our kind of right-wing populism and nationalism in the United States is really built upon deconstruction of the administrative state. What we are trying to do is what I call get a piece of action for the little guy. And that's better jobs, better wages, but also entrepreneurial finance to give them access to capital.
Pure Thatcherism.
That's pure Thatcherism. And by the way, she's the inspiration for that, her and Reagan, but more Thatcher because she was more.
Trump.
Yeah, I think so. And if you look at on the continent, I think the one thing at the Front National, where the Salvini, this is what's so powerful about the 15% flat tax. You're starting to see populist movements on the right understand it's not about control of the state. I think many of the populist movements up until Salvini and Orban with the flat tax just want to get control of the state. And they were no different really than the leftists. And I think people have to understand, if you want wealth creation, if you want a vibrant, robust economy, that comes from entrepreneurs.
And to a degree, Thatcher was the kind of mother of that, or the grandmother of that.
That's what I think her power was. But
the
shopkeepers and also, Little England. But that's where the energy. That's where energy comes from. That's where your dynamism and your ideas come from. She was the one, even more than Reagan, that really understood this thing of entrepreneur finance. I think, and I don't think she gets enough credit. And I don't think we talk enough about it. But I think that her ideas resonate through Trump, and I think now they're starting to resonate through, particularly see the guys in Italy. These people are doing the 15% flat tax are really the heirs to
You mentioned the European
Thatcher.
Union. Will it still exist in its current state in 10 years' time, 20 years'
Here's
time?
what I don't think is. I think the project, and particularly guys, if you take Macron's speech of September of last year, which called for more integration, this whole thing that Europe is going to be like the United States of Europe. In other words, Italy would be like North Carolina, and Austria would be like South Carolina, and England would be like Georgia. Basically like our states, a site like federalism, right? I think that's done. I think what you're going to have is a collection of independent nation states.
In a trading zone?
In some sort of trading zone, but they'll figure it out. But certainly not, if you take that speech, the high water mark of the kind of Jean Monnet idea was Macron's speech in September last year, where he talked about the next phase of integration.
And what are you doing about that? You're involved in Italy. You're doing
right now.
Are you fomenting revolution? What are you up to?
Well, no, but I'm very involved. Look, I've taken 10 years of my life to work in this populist nationalist movement, so I'm very involved in talking to people throughout Europe. One of the things that I'm telling people to focus on is the European parliamentary elections in May of 2019. I think they're incredibly important. And so I am starting to work with various parties throughout Europe and various individuals. And I'm probably spending a lot more time over here, starting after the November elections. I'm very focused, obviously, on Trump's re-elect.
With a think tank or something? Or what are you
planning? I think it's a think tank, but also not just for ideas, but also for tools. For tools, I was very impressed with what happened in Italy, where both Five Star and the League really ran internet campaigns with very little money. I think people need more expertise in social media. They need to know how to target. They need to know how to kind of build these organizations. So it's both an idea generator and maybe to help build tools that people can use actually in elections.
And back in the UK, is Nigel Farage's time come? shares are rising in Farage PLC, aren't they?
Well, I've told Farage from day one. I think it's very important for him to get re-engaged. You know, I consider myself a close friend and a colleague, and I have there are very few people in the world I have more respect for than Nigel Farage. Somebody's been fighting this fight for 20, 25 years.
He's got the scars on his back.
And you talk about an Old Testament prophet. I mean, he's called this one for 20, 25 years and been working on it. I have told him I think it's now time for him to get re-engaged, and I think UKIP is a platform that could be rejuvenated. And I think Nigel Farage is the guy to do it, and I think he needs to get personally engaged in that.
Looking ahead, President Trump meets Putin on Monday.
Yeah.
Do you think, is the fear of Russia overdone in this country? Or is it a real fear and should be respected?
But here's the thing, let's put Russia in perspective, because you know I'm the guy that's been trying to focus everybody on China. Russia's economy is the size of New York State, okay? And it's in a demographic down spiral, right? It has no innovation, no technology, it has natural resources. No president, and I almost include Ronald Reagan in that, has been as tough on Putin as Trump. Last May, he goes to Warsaw. He says, our number one priority is defense of Western civilization. And at the time he says that, he says, you can't do these natural gas deals. If you do these deals with Russia, you're basically beholden to them. Mm-hmm. We're going to lay an alternative view of liquefied natural gas. Mm-hmm. The other day, he says, if you look at John Stoltenberg, who's the General Secretary of NATO, at that breakfast, people should watch the whole thing. It's about 7 minutes long. Stoltenberg, they're talking about it, and Stoltenberg goes, yeah, but we have trading relationships with Russia. And Trump goes, this is not a trading relationship. Mm-hmm. This is 70% of Germany's energy. Mm-hmm. Germany is basically beholden. If you look at what happened in the Ukraine, I think it was in 2009, mm-hmm. where they cut the natural gas off. Yeah. I mean, Russia is not beyond using this as a geopolitical weapon.
But is the fear of Russia overblown, do you think?
I think I think it's time to bring the, look,
In the
Cold War. But here's the thing. I was on a Navy destroyer that hunted Soviet submarines. It was built for that. And I was in the Pentagon when President Reagan came as a junior officer. I know that the Russians are not good guys, okay? But we deal with a lot of not good guys in the world. I think people have to put it in perspective. I think it is very important, particularly with this rise of China and what that means with Iran and with Turkey, okay, that I've advocated from day one that the Judeo-Christian West, that's broadly defined with Israel, the Gulf Emirates, etc., have to form some sort of unity. I think it's very important to end the Cold War. I think President Trump President Trump is saying we got enough going on in the world that the two things we got to look at ending is the Korean War and the Cold War. There's no reason that we should be at loggerheads with Russia. There's enough common ground there to meet. And these are not people saying, oh, Russia's terrific and let's embrace them. Nobody, no politician, okay, since at least Ronald Reagan has been as tough on Russia as Donald Trump. I mean,
in what way?
Well, first off, he's telling people you can't do these natural gas deals. Okay, he's saying flat out. He says if you do these natural gas deals, and I'm offering you an alternative, and it's just not to make the United States money. It's not to just make the United States money. It's to give people a strategic alternative. This is why Poland and the Visegrad countries are actually looking at the alternative because they don't want to be beholden to Russia. So since Russia's economy, it's the size of New York State, it's totally dependent upon oil and gas. He's sitting there and basically telling Putin, hey, I'm trying to cut off the deals that are going to get you cash flow. If I'm Putin and those guys, I look at Trump and say, you know what?
So NATO should scale back in the Eastern European countries?
Well, the Eastern European countries already said they're going to try to do the liquefied natural gas deals with us. They're very concerned about being beholden to Russia and natural gas. But Germany, look, it's 70%. Here's what I think gets it galls Trump. Yeah. Germany's got a healthy economy. It's got a budget surplus. They have 1.2% of GDP, but when you go under the hood and look at the 1.2%, they have all kind of global warming and healthcare. We're talking about, they just had a report the other day of 128 combat fighters, 7 can get airborne. Germany can put up 1 brigade of troops right now. Yeah. Okay. The fact is, you know what? I understand the historic issues, but I think we're now to the point that we can kind
70 years ago.
Yeah, we can manage that. We can manage that. Okay. Germany has to start to pull their weight. Okay, and they have to. If we're having this big thing on NATO where we're actually putting up so much of the money for it and so much of the troops, the question has to be asked: how are you so geopolitically beholden to Russia? Trump had quite frankly, the balls to bring that up. And look, people say, well, the way he does it, he's turning off people. He's a businessman, and he's blunt, and he's to the point.
And we don't get that in this country, or the media can't see that.
No, I think it's a permanent political class. Listen, all the highfalutin talk about NATO, of all the politicians, Republican and Democrat, and all the think tanks and the Morning Joe crowd, David Ignatius and Richard Haas and this whole crowd that just dumps on Trump nonstop.
That's in the U.S.,
not one of them did any work to go under the hood and see what it was going to take to make this alliance thrive. Donald Trump is about making NATO work, and he's done it. You know, he's worked on this thing every day.
And just finally, thank you for your time on coming on our podcast. Can Brexit work? Will it be a success? Are you a half full, half empty kind of guy?
No, I'm a guy that believes in the British people. I said, anything, look what you guys did to build your empire. There's nobody with the smarts, the grit, and determination of the people of the United Kingdom. Anything you set your mind to. The same people that got back and saying against all odds, okay, and had leave win, okay, when they were just mocking and ridiculing, you had no chance, you had everything against you. Right, all the universities, all the great thinkers. You had
churches,
celebrities.
Leaders,
you had
bosses, everyone's boss.
Everybody's boss. You had the City of London. You had all the big multinational corporations. You did it. This is all about human agency. They try to make it like it's a second law of thermodynamics or some law of physics.
It's not very complicated.
It's tough, but you got a lot of tough people. And I think if people galvanize around now, these people are saying, "Hey, this is not what the people of England voted for." You're going to see a very different outcome.
Steve Bannon, thank you for coming on Travel's Brexit podcast.
Thanks, brother. Thanks for having me.